Hello, happy Friday. Uh, how's it going? So, yeah, I figured a friend of mine uh, alerted me to this, which I was already like vaguely aware of, but suggested I do a stream on it, which I think is was a rather good idea. So here I am doing it. And yeah, um, essentially, let's have a quickly refresh myself on the last Neuralink paper. Mm. Because uh, they've published a meaningful scientific paper on the topic of Neuralink. Most of the rest has been marketing fluff, which, it's an exciting new project, and it's Elon Musk who likes to do his self-promotion promotion stuff. So, that's fine with me. I'm not of the opinion that any form of like self-promotion is terrible. Um, so I don't mind. It's just that he has been hyping it up a lot with relatively little, um, well, with relatively little to show to it until he published this paper, which, Elon Musk and Neuralink. I can guarantee you that it wasn't Elon Musk who wrote the bulk of this, but uh, that's unfortunately fairly standard in academic labs as well. Uh, so it's got USB-C output. Right, let's look at the key takeaways. So um, high bandwidth BMI system, so that's brain-machine interface. Oh yeah, it says that there. Um, the notable thing about, well, there are like three main notable features of Neuralink based on the information we have so far. Um, First of all, it's highly multipolar, so it has an array of flexible electrode threads with as many as 3072 electrodes per array. Um, so this will have 96 individual like wires of some sort with a series um, of points along the wires, each of which is an electrode contact. uh, Doing like a couple of wires, each with a dozen or so contacts on, is pretty standard. Like it's multipolar electrodes are widely used in deep brain stimulation and like related neuromodulation tasks or neuro recording um, tasks like electrophysiology, but it's not typical to get 3,000 contacts. You're more typically looking at like a few dozen maybe across the whole system, often far fewer. You might like old school deep brain stimulation systems have like maybe four. Um, so this is potentially an order of magnitude or more step up, a couple of orders of magnitude maybe step up from where we are currently in clinical practice. Now, I should note that nothing individually that Neuralink does hasn't been demonstrated before to some degree in labs, like having highly multipolar electrodes, having a system that like plugs into via USB, um, having flexible electrodes. That's another one of their big features that doesn't cause so much damage over a long period of time, hopefully, to the surrounding tissue that it's embedded in. And uh, the robotic insertion system, the system they use for implanting the electrodes, they purport to be much, much more efficient and less invasive than a typical implantation, especially of so many electrodes. Uh, so all of these things have been done individually, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the groups like working on these various projects have been consulted or hired by Neuralink to achieve this together. The exciting thing, if this like bears out, is having it all in one place on one integrated device that allows you to get lots of electrodes implanted safely, with minimal damage over time. Like that's kind of holy grail for implantable electrophysiology systems at the moment. Um, and if it does live up to the hype, then it's going to allow us to do procedures that currently would only be possible in like lab animals with fixed head mountings for very limited series of tests in humans routinely, which would be incredible. Genuinely a massive breakthrough. Now, we can get onto a bit later whether it's going to allow us to all have, heads, brains connected directly to the internet all the time, and all of the like actual neural lace sort of stuff that Elon Musk is going on about. But certainly from the perspective of uh, uh, like neurosurgical interventions of health treatments, this could be genuinely an amazing breakthrough. Um, Problem is, there's several impediments to developing a system like this, which I'm still very much unconvinced the degree to which like Musk and his colleagues have seriously considered, and a lot of the a lot of what I've been hearing so far is Musk saying, we'll have this to market in X years. It'll be usually X is a rather small number. Um, we'll be bringing this into patients soon. We're going into clinical trials. All of this exciting stuff. Um, but just the like preclinical verification of this kind of stuff before you can go into before you can get a um, the FDA, what's it called, like humanitarian exemption for using it for treating individual patients. You've still got to go through a fair number of hoops, and to get it to the level of licensing where you can actually sell it on the market, have it indicated for a specific condition and have surgeons regularly implanting it, is often a decade or more. These trials take a long time, and we can maybe some other stream we can go into the various problems of um, medical device licensing and why it is complex and expensive and so forth. And part of it is probably uh, overzealousness on the part of regulators, but a big part of it is also entirely legitimate caution in not wanting random, fly-by-night quacks to implant weird shit or give weird drugs to a large number of people while claiming that it's going to do things that they have no evidence for. Um, that's not to say that that's what Neuralink is doing here by any means, but there are certainly legitimate reasons for wanting to ensure safety, and I'm here we go. Corpus callosum right now there is a very limited number of uses for implanted electrodes, maybe super limited control of prosthetic limbs via motor cortex and implants. Like, what the fuck does it mean to hooked up to the internet? Yeah, that's so there are quite a lot of uses for implanted electrodes. Admittedly, I'm biased here because most of my um, graduate and up work has been focused on deep brain stimulation. But you've got, deep brain stimulation like peripheral nerve stimulation. You can do depth electrode recordings for epilepsy and potentially other disorders. And crucially, if we can reduce the barrier to entry for implanting electrodes, make it safer and more effective and cheaper, then there are a whole bunch more potential applications for such a device. So, like, all of that sort of stuff, yeah, it's definitely got a lot of applications that can be used for. But yeah, the hooked up to the internet part, I really don't know what that means. I mean, I'm a, you know, card-carrying transhumanist. I say that almost literally. I was president of the Oxford University Transhumanist Society for a while, and I'm very much in favour of, hooking us up to the internet and all of that kind of exciting future shit. But currently, the proposals that, or the stuff that Elon Musk's been talking about, yeah, it does, Golden, it does smell very much of like the kind of high-minded ideals. Like when Musk is talking about becoming a multi-planetary civilization, um, nobody seriously thinks that he's going to be setting up a base on Mars in the next decade. But it's a nice like high-eyed, wide-eyed, high-aiming like uh, goal. But yeah, it does kind of smell of mass bullshit. Um, like there are ways. I mean, my endocrine system is in a very real sense hooked up to the internet. Uh, my blood glucose monitor in my arm sends out Bluetooth signal to my phone, which has an app that uh, bullshit meter. Um, yeah, which has an app that records the data and then transmits it over the internet to Neon Golden in chat, who can see if I'm going low while I'm sleeping or anything like that. So there are definitely meaningful ways in which we can like hook up someone's brain to the internet. In a very limited sense, some of the experimental like deep brain stimulation devices coming out at the moment can do that in the sense that they've got an app that the implant communicates with, and that app communicates via the internet with, say, their physician to tell them, you know, physiological readouts over the last 24 hours, or like feedback on the device, if it's going low battery or whatever. Um, so in that kind of sense, yeah, it's I mean it's something we can do today, hooking someone's nervous system up to the internet. Hell, it's something we've been able to do since the late 90s. I think Kevin Warwick was the first person, in some sense, to hook his nervous system up to the internet when he got an electrode implanted in his arm. I think it was a Utah array, which is just like a little electrode chip implanted in his arm that was hooked up to the internet and transmitted to an identical one in his wife's arm, I believe. I'm not sure if the first time he did it was with his wife, but um, and so when he contracted his hand, when the neurons fired, it would send tingling to over the internet to his wife. Um, so in the very limited sense, yeah, we can hook someone's nervous system up to the internet. But when Musk talks about it, it's much more. He's definitely evoking the idea of being in cyberspace with all of the screens flashing up, and I've got a direct visual feed, and I can just think out text, and it appears in front of me, all of that kind of stuff. Which, again, as someone who is personally a transhumanist and enjoys science fiction and all of this sort of stuff, I'm totally on board for that. And I've kind of dedicated my career to making that sort of stuff happen. Um, but we're quite a way off that. And currently, we just don't understand nearly enough about the basic language that neurons use to talk to each other in order to like decode it and communicate two ways directly with brain tissue like that. Um, we're limited to like very broad strokes look in terms of stuff that's actually like medically relevant. We can decode, we can record individual neuron signals and interpret certain things based on their firing rates, but that sort of stuff is very much like for physiology studies in the lab. Um, Currently, we cannot do a lot with that. Now, of course, one of the reasons to be optimistic about this is that with increased proliferation of devices like this, we could get to the stage much quicker where we can decode information. Part of the reason why it's so difficult to like decode the brain's code is the fact that we just don't have many opportunities to record directly from human brains. Like, obviously, it requires at least invasive recording. We can stick people in scanners and we can put EEG, like hair nets, over their scalp, but those give very indirect measures of what's going on in your brain. Now, don't get me wrong, they're extremely useful. fMRI has revolutionized neuroscience. Neon Golden up in chat can tell you both how awesome fMRI is, but I'm sure she could also tell you how limited it is and how we really need to be careful about overinterpreting the results of an fMRI study. If we see increased activity, which is actually increased oxygenation of blood flow in a specific area, that doesn't necessarily mean that that area is responsible for whatever task the person is doing at the time. Um, and I've worked more with EEG myself, electroencephalogram, which is recording the electrical signal from the scalp. And again, fantastic technique. We've learned massive, massive amounts about the human brain by studying EEG, and yet you're essentially listening in. If each neuron firing was an individual voice, you're kind of listening to the roar of a crowd with EEG. You've got maybe a couple of hundred electrodes if you want to spend fucking ages setting up the system. Maybe a couple of hundred electrodes over the scalp, recording activity from tens of billions of neurons, and each one gives you useful information, but it we can't determine a lot about what individual neurons are doing, and we probably need to determine quite a lot about what individual neurons are doing in order to have a really detailed view of what the human brain is doing, and then be able to like directly transmit visual information to it, things like that. Now, there are I don't want to underplay how well neuroscience has gone over the last like 50 years, because we can decode um, certain aspects of like visual activity in the cortex using both electrode recordings and um, MRI recordings, and there's a lot we can do, but again, we're going from like something we can do sometimes in the lab in very limited sense in very controlled conditions versus something that Musk is talking about being able to do as a consumer product. Um, and like I say, it's an exciting vision, and I would be largely very much on board with the prospect of us all being able to get the Neuralink implant. But yeah, this is another good point. Uh, Neil Golden brings up is like vision is like vision and audition hearing are probably like the two things we understand best in terms of actually being able to like speak the language of the brain. Um, like cochlear implants, obviously it's targeting the cochlea, which is quite peripheral to the brain, but still it's a nerve interface. Cochlear implants have been around since the 70s, and while they were pretty shit at the start, everything sounded very like robotic like, um, we were still able to engage in some sort of, you know, direct neural interface back then. Um, would the Neuralink interface be able to differentiate individual neurons, or would the signal from multiple neural populations form the signal? So you'd absolutely, in the case of Neuralink as it's currently being described, you'd actually absolutely be picking up signal from a, a variety, a whole neural population. Um, but potentially, and I'm speculating here because we have just don't know enough about the tech yet, especially as it actually like goes into production eventually. Um, but potentially you'd be recording from a far smaller population of neurons than with a traditional like depth electrode for epilepsy monitoring, for example. Um, standard depth electrodes are recording from something on the order of like tens to hundreds of thousands of neurons at once, probably. Whereas if you get them small enough, then you can record from like dozens to hundreds at once. There's also some clever stuff you can do with like shaping the field that you're recording from. So if you have like a little electrode wire with three electrodes, imagine a like nuclear warning symbol. Um, So, uh, yeah, if you imagine the black bits are electrodes, you can have kind of segment of the ring um, recording signal, and then you can tune by either stimulating or recording from different of from combinations of the three in order to kind of steer the direction around the electrode that you're recording or stimulating from. So there's a bunch of clever ways that you can get the population that you're recording from down, and sometimes you want to be recording from a larger population, um, but basically the kind of top level thing is that the finer the electrodes and the closer they're placed to individual neurons, and the less like glial scarring that builds up, the better a signal you're going to get, the more like precise and the more targeted to what you're actually wanting to stimulate or record from. Um, and yeah, so the main reason I'm like practically excited about Neuralink is not so much that I think that we're going to be, walking around with the internet in our skulls in 5, 10 years, but that it potentially offers a vast new expanse of electrophysiological data for neuroscientists. If it does, or a product like it does become uh, widely utilized in clinical practice, then we can see just I don't want to say quantum leap because quantum leaps are very small, a revolution, you know, explosion in the availability of these data. Because currently, a lot of our, to my mind, most useful um, recordings in awake functioning humans come from electrode recordings during surgery that often, if you're lucky, you can get a few patients a year and you can give them like 10 minutes of physiological testing during a surgery for something else, which is absolutely invaluable data. There's a reason why neurosurgeons and neuroscientists go through massive hoops to get just these like 5, 10 minute snatches of recording from mid-surgery from a live human brain. But those experiments are such a pain to set up. Um, and you can only do the recording while they're, lying on a surgical table with maybe like a laptop in a gantry above them so they can like see the visual task looking up. Um, you can only do it on a tiny number of patients for a tiny amount of time, and it's very, very limiting to what you can actually record, what activity you can correlate with. Fucking headset. What behavior you can actually correlate with the activity being recorded. And if we can do that like all the time with hundreds of thousands of patients, uh, and ideally hundreds of thousands of patients with different disorders, so we can uh, remove the confounding variables of their condition. Because one issue with a lot of the depth electrode based like electrophysiology in like neural recording in functioning patients is that currently it's done on patients, on people with epilepsy or neurodegenerative disorders or any of these conditions that both is the reason for our getting, I say our, neurosurgeons, neuroscientists getting access to uh, their brain, but it's also potentially a massive confound because they've necessarily got this problem with their brain that means that they're not functioning like normal uh, individuals. And it's often the state of the kind of normal functioning brain that we want to study. Now, sometimes that's really useful. There are ways that we can compare and contrast pathological brains with normal ones. Again, normal, healthy ones, whatever. All of these terms have some kind of normative bias to them, unfortunately. But with healthy brains, in order to see what the difference is. But if we can't get the data from at least relatively healthy brains, then we've just got nothing to compare to. So we have to go by our best judgment of what aspects of the recording are indicative of the pathological activity and what aspects are indicative of just normal activity. Because, in most respects, a pathological brain is functioning pretty normally. It's only relatively subtle changes that lead to pathologies because obvious major changes lead to death in most cases. Um, the brain is very finely tuned and very delicate, and any like major changes to its function just mean it doesn't work. Right. So yeah, I'm excited to see what's going to be in this presentation. And it is quite interesting. I followed Elon Musk's work for a while, um, with varying degrees of fanboyishness. I think it's fair to say less these days. Um, but it's particularly interesting now following some of his work that I actually understand because previously I'm interested in space travel and electric cars are cool and all of this is very good and fine, but I have no real engineering expertise um, beyond like a few bits of very niche stuff mostly related to brain implants. Um, so yeah, it's been intriguing being on the kind of more expert side of the aisle this time, and both seeing, you know, I was already last year to basically write Neuralink off and sort of say, well, he's promising a lot, but it'll probably just be a slightly rehashed BrainGate system, which will, be fine, but it won't be. But seeing the paper released last year, genuinely very impressed. The work is encouraging. It's like I say, not anything like individually revolutionary, but packaging together a bunch of technologies that could be genuinely game changing in neuroscience and in oh, we're just starting up soon, um, and in neurosurgery. So, I am excited. I think that, well, I don't want to make any firm predictions because they have been very tight-lipped, other than that one paper. Um, but this is worth paying attention to. But I suspect we're also going to see a fair bit of standard Musk bullshit. So you know, uh, want to make any guesses before it starts? Okay, so I think I've already seen they've been through primate tests. So I reckon their primate tests probably will have gone quite well. So probably using macaques. I can't remember for sure. It'll either be macaques or marmosets. Probably macaques. I'd want to use macaques for this. Uh, but so primate tests probably going quite well. I reckon they've got to be in talks with the FDA already, um, for anything like the time frame that Musk has been talking about. Oh, I've just got to have my insulin and whatnot. So I would suspect that it'll be fairly light on the details of the actual application. I One thing I'm intrigued to see, and I don't want to say confidently, but whether or not they've already put it into a human, um, because it's possible they've started the like early stage testing. It's not going to be quite like stage one, two, three, because that's done with um, like drugs. not so much with medical devices, although there is a similar, it'll go through similar kind of um, stages of testing. But partly because, once the device is in, they tend not to take it out, so you can keep on gathering data on the earlier stage participants. Also, quite a lot of the time, the earlier stage will get something that isn't exactly identical to the production device. Uh, but yeah, I would make a fairly strong prediction that at some point Musk is going to quote a time frame that I will find slightly risible, um, and because that's like pretty much standard for a Musk project. Um, and let's see, uh, I reckon there'll be, if either in monkeys or in a early test subject, I reckon there'll be some kind of like showy demonstration. Because if it's just Musk like talking up things that he's excited for in the future, that's not going to be a very good big update that they've hyped quite a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some sort of practical demonstration, which would be cool. Um, Also, from my personal bias, I would be very interested to see whether Musk mentions security at all, because this is, um, yeah, I'm wondering whether it's going to be like a demo of he shows off a bit of the hardware sort of thing, or whether we're actually going to have a demo in an organism, because that's going to be much more interesting to me. Um, but sorry, just a sec. But yeah, um, hmm. It would be baller to have Monkey on stage getting his brain recorded. Yeah. Well, I suspect if they do use an animal, it'll be like a live cast from a lab or something. Um, oh, apparently going to show real neurons firing. I haven't seen the preview stuff. If they're just showing real neurons firing, eh, like I can show you real neurons firing with like the stuff I've got around this room. Fucking, I mean, well, not my cat. I'm not using my cat, but you know, showing some neurons firing. If it is that, then if that's all it is, and it's not in a organism, I'm not particularly impressed. Not least because the whole, well, let's not prejudge it, but if it's just in a slice, um, it's this thing where it's play Skyrim on any brain. Yeah, that's the plan, I think. Well, Uh, well, actually, if they stuck an electrode in a fruit fly brain, I think I'd be more impressed than doing it in a slice in a petri dish. Because if they can get one of these into a fruit fly brain, that's at least reasonably encouraging for how fine it is. But the real so the kind of three, I guess, main things I'm looking out for are the mm, four, like the clinical trial details. So what is actually happening with like the approval process and how far along it is it. Um, Whether they've demonstrated the implantation system, how like stable the signal is over time, and uh, oh yeah, any actual understanding of electrophysiology, because so far they haven't demonstrated a huge amount of that. Um, but even if they're terrible at electrophysiology, it doesn't necessarily mean it's useless because people who know that shit might get hold of it and use it usefully. But certainly, if they're claiming to pipe the internet to our brain anytime soon. They're going to need to start demonstrating that they've got substantially better understanding of how the brain communicates than anyone in the open literature. Uh, so yeah, it could mean any one of many things. I guess on the kind of scale of impressiveness of recording a neuron firing. On the one hand, if they bring out a petri dish with a sample of brain that they've hooked up uh, a like pre-production model of the system that just has an electrode and they're going, oh, look, a neuron firing. We can hear it. We can see the little spikes. Wow, like that's something that undergrads do in physiology lessons. I will be thoroughly underwhelmed by that. Um, but if they bring out a walking, talking human with epilepsy or something, who comes out and says, you know, I've got one installed, and they show the X-rays and they show a live, um, readout of the activity, the different power bands of activity from whatever site they're recording in, medial temporal lobe or wherever, and they do some simple uh, like behavioral task that changes its firing rate, that I'll be pretty impressed by. Um, and if they further say we're already basically through approvals process, or we're nearing the end, that I will be impressed and shocked by. But it'll probably be somewhere in between those two. Sorry, we're running a bit late, Elon. That's not like you. Um, so yeah, it's going to be interesting when it finally kicks off. Bloody. Just going to do a quick blood test. My sensor is fairly new and, well, certainly on theme with this evening of biotech that doesn't work exactly how it should. My glucose sensor, for the first few days it's in and the last few days it's in, uh, tends to be very shoddy in its readings, so I need to back it up with regular blood tests. They last for about 14 days, and about 4 of those are just kind of useless. Um, but it's a hell of a lot better than the alternative of just stabbing myself like 20 times a day. Um, so, uh, if someone did hack a multi-electrode array implanted in your sensory cortex, what's the most damage they could do? Good question. It depends very much on their both the complexity of the electrode array and their degree of sophistication. So, like, if we're talking about a very simple kind of modern, um, or even like early 2000s electrode array that's got like a couple of dozen spikes and it's just located in like primary auditory or visual cortex, you could cause some little lights to sparkle on their vision. If they had it there are some people with electrode arrays implanted in their visual cortex for the purposes of um, providing vision, blind people. So you have a camera, say, mounted on glasses, and electrodes going into your visual cortex that's stimulating and provides a very, very low resolution and very like high contrast view of the world. With a patient like that, you could potentially arbitrarily change what they're seeing. Um, with just a healthy person who has an electrode array implanted, you can flash up some phosphenes, some little like sparkling lights, which wouldn't really do much. Um, However, if we're talking about more complex electrode arrays, potentially you could, well, I don't know, with sparkling lights you might be able to sort of convince them that they were hallucinating, something like that. You could probably, combined with some social engineering, you could probably do something fucky with that. Uh, but certainly it would require a fair degree of creativity. Um, Whereas if we get, you know, 20 years down the line and maybe 30, 40, and we've got maybe more very detailed control over our visual cortex with thousands and thousands of electrodes, minimally invasive electrodes spreading throughout it and able to modulate each individual cortical column, then we might be able to basically override someone's vision, Ghost in the Shell style, and just completely edit out or edit in whatever we wanted. And it's not necessarily that many steps between being able to put a few depth electrodes into the brain and being able to control someone's vision like that. It's quite a few, but it's not necessarily something that we're going to be waiting on for centuries. Um, so that's why I think it's something we should consider now, and is why I will be, when this thing finally starts, I will be paying a close eye on any mention of security, and any potentially fucky things one might be able to do with the system. Um, is this? It's not there. I was wondering if I saw full working and I was like, oh, maybe this stream is just broken, but it is their official stream, so that would be a bit weird. Um, okay, right. I should switch my audio. Uh, yeah. So hopefully this will start up soon, and we'll be able to uh, see the new exciting demo. Um, uh, yeah. So hopefully we'll see a like reasonable, restrained demonstration of something that's technologically mature and plausibly going to come to market in limited form in the next few years. I doubt it. Um, I suspect it's going to be about 20% genuinely impressive novel tech that's exciting but farther off than implied. Um, about 60% puffing and like padded nonsense that like seems impressive but is, and about 20% like pie in the sky bullshit that Elon Musk can't possibly believe is going to happen in anytime soon. Um, that's my like top level prediction, at least based on previous Elon Musk announcements. Though, like, you do have to hand it to him that he manages to eventually deliver on more than one might expect. Um, like SpaceX is going very, very well. Uh, Obviously, like largely funded by the U.S. government, but nevertheless, it's quite impressive that he's managed to, build up a rocket company from fairly, ground level up to, I think it's now the world's largest launch provider. I think it's eclipsed either the US or Russia governments now, which is pretty cool. Um, Similarly, Tesla Motors has been seriously challenging the thrones of major automakers, and while it hasn't got the stellar market share that some of its supporters would have hoped, it's certainly contributed towards driving an increased acceptance and desire for electric cars. So that's pretty good. Um, and each of these things has come along with a bunch of hype that hasn't fully played out, but he's delivered more than most. It's just a bit of a shame that he's like an actual crazy person, at least on Twitter. Um, I do wish that he'd fucking chill out with well, the craziest stuff at the very least, like the shit takes on COVID and calling that diver guy a pedo over and over. What the fuck was that about? Anyway, interesting chap certainly, and hopefully, yeah, I wish Elon Musk were a bit less dank. Um, yeah, doesn't he have something going on? Oh, I don't know about. I don't care about his personal life as long as he's not like actively beating people up or whatnot. Though, um, uh, yeah, like Edison was pretty big asshole, but nevertheless, managed to do a lot for advancing the world. Um, and there's on the topic of Edison, Tesla always gets all of the internet points, but there's definitely something to be said for being the person who actually popularizes something. Tesla might have come up with a lot of Edison's inventions, but uh, Edison was the one who actually brought them to market and made them viable. So it's not always just the good and idealistic engineer working as a genius for the evil capitalist. Because without an Edison, we never would have gotten a whole bunch of useful technology. At least not gotten it until considerably later. Ah, fuck me. Um, I haven't seen that, but I think you've mentioned that to me before, though. I seem to recall you mentioning it. But yeah. Uh, anyway, his personal life is probably not ideal, but the thing I'm most interested in is what he does with all of the technologies he's pioneering, and mixed bag so far. But uh, like I say, the thing that oh yeah, I recall that now. Yeah, yeah, that like fucking weird. Yeah, I don't know how much of that was true, but it did come across as very, very strange. Um, though yeah, like Grimes and Musk being together is the kind of like weird uh 2020s shit that I'm on board with. The 2020s so far have been pretty weird in a not good way. But like billionaire inventor going out with rock star, like that seems cool, weird, but like in a nice way. Um, Hopefully he's not, treating her like shit or anything. But yeah, uh, he is a character. I think it's fair to say. Um, Sorry, transhumanist elven punkster. Yes, quite right. Also, the naming their kid after the A12. Um, like, fair enough. I I have sympathy for that kind of weird shit, and like, I wouldn't. I'd probably be a bit pissed off at my parents if I did it, but my parents aren't like billionaires and didn't send me to, super fancy school where everyone's the child of a celebrity who's called, Apple Tree or whatever. Um, Twitter looks like update time is 3:30, and it may involve kittens. Okay, okay. Um, Fair enough. Right. Let's. What time is it now? Okay. Well, we've got 9 minutes to go then. Although, again, I suspect we're not going to be super perfectly on time. But there you go. Um. Uh. Yeah. I mean, I would suspect they wouldn't use kittens just from the. Oh, it's certainly been done before. Like, there's lots of good, very useful visual work that's been done on cats in particular. Um, my friend Colin Blakemore was attacked through much of the 1990s by animal rights extremists because he did research in cats that has saved many thousands of people from blindness. Um, but yeah, kittens would be a weird choice if they're doing invasive electrode recordings. Um, like I would suspect if they're using any animals for electrode recordings, it'll either be rats or macaques. But max Hodex count. Okay. Um, well, thank you for keeping us updated, Neon Golden. Um, let's see. Ah, yes, we've got. So, those are the kittens. Doesn't look very much like they've had electrode implants undertaken. Looks like they're doing. Is that the SpaceX factory? Um, okay, well, yep, they've been showing off the kittens. Uh, okay, right. Replaced by kittens due to COVID. Yeah, I would very much, um, as a medical scientist with not much of a background in epidemiology, but still, I would absolutely endorse the replacement of audiences with kittens for the time being. Um, yeah, the RNC has been. I've only been following it in, like clip form. Um, Ooh, the Lincoln Project has posted something. Let's read it.
That
It's
is
been
rotten.
bizarre.
America is a depraved nation, a land cloaked in darkness, fascism, tyranny, and communism. Violent anarchists, agitators, criminals, a land of racial, economic, and social injustice. Human traffickers who prey on women and children, crippling power outages, tremendous power outage. Nobody's seen anything like it. Criminal alien, wild-eyed Marxist, 400,000 criminals, a cancer that is rotten to the root. Rioting, looting, arson, violence and danger in the streets, anarchists, rioters and criminals, anarchy and mayhem, vandals, arson,
So many anarchists.
looters and rioters, rioters, looters and flag burners, anarchists, agitators, violent crime, radical left, speech codes, and soul-crushing conformity. A wicked nation that must be punished. As I've already been doing for quite some time, if you've noticed. Joe Biden.
Yeah, there's so many weird things about that speech, but they are Neuralink kittens, but not for research. Um, but yeah, the most concerning thing is the fact that it was on the White House lawn, and not even like subtly, just very much the White House. Do we not have the Hatch Act? Did that just go away? Anyway, this isn't a political stream. this is a terrifying future of neuromodulation stream. Um, but uh, it's not great. Anyway, I'm going to get myself a bit of sugars. Um, I did just inject some insulin because I just want another glass of Coke, which is fine. Kitten researchers, I support this. I like the idea of a kitten researcher. At least a kitten lab assistant. Oh, right. Apologies for the weird noises. I'm just getting some ice out of my freezer. Yes, I do have a freezer in my living room because I am weirdly into drinks. Oh, right. Elon Musk always taking his time. Um. Oh, piss! I'm low on Coke. Um. Amy, you did remind me to order some Coke, and I apparently haven't, so that's my fault. It's fine though. I've got a bit left. It's Coca-Cola, not cocaine. Uh, Cocaine's, I don't know, it's fine, just a bit boring. Not that I would ever advocate using drugs. That would be a violation of the Twitch terms of service or something, probably. I don't know. Oh shit, just spilling my bloody drink. Right. Oh. Um. Yeah, they have put dogs in fMRIs. There's a lab. Is it Belgian? I can't remember where it is. Um, but there's a lab that's gotten really good at training them to sit still in an MRI, which is apparently they're better than most human participants, which I'm not surprised by. Um, excuse me. As someone who has participated in a few MRI studies and whose fiance has run some, I think we can both confirm that it's a pain in the ass getting people to actually sit properly still for the whole scan, because pretty small movement will completely fuck it up, and the higher resolution the scanner, the like smaller movements will bugger it up. So you want to just strap people down. Of course, that's against research ethics. We can't and shouldn't do that. Sometimes you want to though. Yeah, it is absolutely very difficult to stay still that long, but the doggos manage it. Um, ooh, excuse me. Oh, my sleep has been all weird lately. Maybe if I get a Neuralink, I can, overcome my need for sleep. Probably not. This sleep's pretty like fundamental to our functioning, uh, but it would be nice. You might be able to use it to like overcome tiredness temporarily, uh, but yeah, probably not going to get rid of the need for sleep. Uh, yeah, maybe it'll help regulate my sleep if I can retrain my circadian rhythms. That'd be good. Um, yes, I've tried blue lights and everything. Uh, One cool thing about Elon Musk's whole like shtick is the fact that he so directly rips from sci-fi, and I have a lot of respect for that. Uh, Sci-fi has always been a major factor in technological development. I say always. It has at least for the past like century and a half or so. Um, this is a topic I should probably see if I can get Anders Sandberg on to discuss, because I know he's been thinking about this a bit recently. Um, about I'm particularly thinking of say Arthur C. Clarke's description of perhaps the most like direct example description of geostationary orbit, was, and satellites generally, had a massive impact on the developments of satellites and the placing of them in geostationary and geosynchronous orbit. Um, the iPad and like modern mobile phones basically owe their design to Star Wars: The Next Generation, Star Wars generally, uh, and it is always cool to see inventors and technologists and engineers and so forth just go like, this thing from the cool sci-fi book I read, I want to make it real, and then do. And yeah, it's always just cool and exciting. I like the aesthetics of it. Not that it, you know, uh, guarantees good products or anything, but the inspiration for Neuralink, which was Neural Lace from um, Ian M. Banks' Culture novels, is has a very cool description in the books, and I can certainly see why Musk wanted to bring it into reality. Um, of course, I have some of my own concerns, many of which are also born from sci-fi, specifically like Neuromancer and Ghost in the Shell, um, that detail the breaching of security of such implants and the unauthorized control of them, which potentially very much no bueno. But I think it's nonetheless a very cool technology to be following, and indeed I wouldn't have taken such an interest in the kind of defense of this technology, the protection of it, if I didn't think it were potentially very, very valuable indeed. I don't want to my work on neurosecurity. I don't intend as a condemnation of neuromodulation. I don't want to tear down the the technology because I think it's wonderful and it already is helping many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and has the potential to help many millions more, potentially billions, if we develop minimally invasive and safe ways of doing it. But in order to get to that stage, we're going to need to make sure at least it's passably secure. I think there are various reasons to believe that the general public and many philosophers as well would consider direct manipulation of the brain to be a novel and concerning threat. So, it's worth making it as safe as possible now rather than dealing with a big, um, uh, publicly prominent fuck up. Again, I'm reminded of some other fiction, Deus Ex: Human Revolution, which, though obviously not as good as the original Deus Ex, did feature a conspiracy with an evil like industrialist dude trying to hack the world's implants in order to send everyone mad for I can't remember exactly why, bringing stuff down to Dark Age something, I don't know, Illuminati conspiracies, whatever. But um, the possibility of someone trying to do something vaguely analogous to that is non-zero, and I don't think it's highly likely. It's the kind of thing that we should probably hedge against. Um, anyway, I'm just wittering on now about my own work, but that kind of explains why I'm particularly interested in seeing this technology become safe as and secure as early as possible. Um, Feels like high-tech future world would need vast regulated. Do you think the whole small stake equals good thing will have to go away eventually for that to be possible? Um, Not necessarily. I don't necessarily equate small state with good personally, although obviously it's a fairly popular view. Um, I think the more useful thing to talk about is like the amount of power that the government has over our daily lives. Like that's the thing to be more concerned about than um, the literal size of the state in terms of like number of employees or number of amount of tax revenue or whatever. Um, like I think there's many social programs that we could have that would be quite expensive, but that wouldn't meaningfully increase the risk of government oppression. But I do think there's going to be some need to be some form of regulation of this and other emerging technologies. I think particularly in terms of, so there's a variety of strains of technological development at the moment that could end the world, that are very powerful and that allow us to do a lot of wonderful things in the world, but also could cause very, very severe problems precisely because they're so powerful. So the power offered by, or the power necessary to do good things in very large amounts also grants you the power to, do bad things. Um, and the more powerful the technology, then the more good and bad things generally that you're going to do. Oh, my cat's at the door. So in order to control that, we've already, maybe not, we've already decided as a species, I guess, that um, uh, that say nuclear technology, um, proliferation of highly enriched uranium, for example, is something that we're going to like engage in, uh, you know, police actions, multilateral security, and up to and including war to enforce a restriction on, which I think is eminently sensible. I think that international sanctions and treaties and so forth, and potentially a threat of armed conflict, is an appropriate way to deal with um, a material that is extremely, extremely risky. Because nukes aren't that hard to build as long as you can get the fissile material. Um, the thing is, there's technologies now increasingly proliferating that might give people a vaguely comparable level of power to nukes, power to change the world for good or ill, um, but which don't have the limiting factor of fissile material, don't have like a single easy like to identify element that we can control and thereby stop the whole thing from functioning. And say artificial general intelligence or AI generally, even ignoring like artificial general intelligence, existing AI technologies might start falling into that. I'm not saying they're going to like blow up cities, but they have the power and utility to make very, very large changes in the world. Um, so there should probably be some kind of oversight of that. Uh, Similarly, biological weapons are becoming increasingly available, and there are probably some forms of dual-use biotechnology that we should be regulating more than we do at the moment. And potentially, I'm not saying like in the near future, but potentially neurotechnology will come into that category, will become something that allows us vast control over the world and potentially control over our fellow human beings. Um, and if we don't have some kind of organization regulating and moderating its influence, then that's potentially going to be quite a big problem. Now, whether like national governments are the best ones to do this, whether like we need international treaty organizations, whether it's the UN, like whether it's like internal industry regulators, I think it's going to depend very much on the specific technology we're talking about. But I think some of those probably will necessitate like large scale national regulation. And I yeah, I think it's something we're going to. Ooh, here we go. I think it's something we're going to need to do. Um, so we potentially have it starting, maybe? Maybe we start? Mm. Or maybe not. Oh, no, we are live just. Aha. Cool robot. Cool silicon wafer. Okay. We're developing our own chips for it. Interesting. Induction coil a couple of seconds ago. Okay, pigs. Pigs are an interesting choice. Not a bad one. Hello, Elon.
All right, welcome to the Neuralink product demo. I'm really excited to show you what we've got. I think it's going to blow your mind.
We'll see.
So
We'll see.
the primary purpose of this demo is actually recruiting. So I'm going to emphasize this at the beginning and then again at the end. We're not trying to raise money or do anything else. The main purpose of this is to convince great people to come work at Neuralink and help us bring the product to fruition, make it affordable and reliable, and such that anyone who wants one can have one. And so I want to emphasize the purpose of Neuralink. Like, what's our goal? Our goal is to solve important spine and brain problems with a seamlessly implanted device. So
Okay.
you want to have a device
Plausible
that
goal
you can
for the short
basically
term.
put in your head and feel and look totally normal, but it solves some important problem in your brain or spine. And the reality is that almost everyone over time will develop brain and spine problems. These range from minor to very severe, but if you live long enough,
Almost all of these are
everyone
things that are already treated
basically
with
have some kind of
some form of
neurological disorder.
neurological
And
implant.
these range from,
Not
from
necessarily
memory
in
loss to brain damage.
widespread
But
use, but
the thing that's important to appreciate is that an implantable device can actually solve these problems. I think a lot of people don't quite realize that. But all of these, all of your senses, your sight, hearing, feeling, pain, these are all electrical signals
Josh.
sent by neurons to your brain. And if you can
yeah, that's very much
correct
true.
these signals, you can solve everything from memory loss, hearing loss, blindness, paralysis, depression, insomnia, extreme pain, seizures, anxiety, addiction, strokes, brain damage. These can all be solved with an implantable neural link. This is an
They
extremely
can
fundamental
all
thing, and I think a lot of
potentially
people
be
don't quite
treated, yeah.
understand that.
Assuming it works similar
The
to current
neurons are like
implants,
wiring,
plausible.
and you kind of need an electronic thing to solve an electronic problem.
Neurons like wiring
So
have
current medical
similarities.
research, we'll just go through what is the state of the art in medical research, and then what's the state of the art in what consumers or people in general can get. So the current medical
I mean,
research
these are
has shown that you can
yeah, it's got absolutely
read
common metaphor. Yeah.
neurons in a human's brain. So there's something called the Utah array, which has about 100 channels per array. But it's like kind of like it's a bed of rigid spikes that's literally inserted with an air hammer.
This
So
is the research version.
slightly
There
discomforting,
are
I
other
think.
alternatives in clinical practice, but
And there's wires and a box on your head, and so it's some infection risk, and obviously it will look pretty weird if you walk around with boxes on your head.
true.
And in order to use it, you have to have an expert medical professional there, and it's only been done in a few dozen people. So, but it is served as an important proof of concept that this can be done.
Sure,
So
agree with that.
we did want to point this out and show that this actually does work. It's just not something that the average person could use effectively. And in terms of what is currently available,
I know, right?
there is something called deep brain stimulation.
Uh-huh.
We put electrodes,
Here's
a
my
small
shit.
number of electrodes in your brain, and will actually zap your brain with an electric current.
It doesn't
And it's valuable for
destroy
its
that
uses,
brain
but it
matter,
can't read or write
but
high bandwidth information. I would say this is sort of a bit like sort of kicking the TV, which does work, but not always, and it has limitations. Nonetheless, this has greatly helped over 150,000 people.
so just to quickly pause there. Destroying a sugar cube of brain matter that's overhyping it. Oh yeah, no, he's a terrible public speaker. I saw him talk in person once, and he's not very good. Like I don't know, it's kind of part of his like weird charm or something. I don't know, but um, yeah, I think destroying it is overstating it, but there is some like glial buildup and scarring that can impede stimulation over time. So I'll yeah,
And it's actually just despite being somewhat of a brute force approach, it has been very effective for a lot of people. And this
brute
is what's
force
currently
approach is a good
available.
description.
So we
I
want to
endorse
radically
that.
improve this by multiple orders of magnitude. Improve it by a factor of 100, then 1,000, then 10,000. So going into the Neuralink architecture, what we've done over the past year is dramatically simplify the device. So about a year ago, we had a device which had uh, uh, multiple parts, including a piece that it had to sort of sit behind your ear, and it was complex, and you wouldn't still look totally normal. You'd have a thing behind your ear. So
That's not a bad idea
um,
though. There's
we've
reasons
simplified
to go
this
with that.
to simply something that is uh, about the size of a large coin, and it goes
Oh, is it
uh,
flush with the
in
skull?
your skull, replaces a piece of skull,
Ha!
and the wires then connect within a few centimeters or about an inch away from the device. Um,
It's a clever way
and
of
this
doing
is
it.
sort of what it looks like.
Okay, okay. So I'm just gonna pause there because I actually have here, for comparison's sake, deep brain stimulation implant. So this just sits beneath the skin there with wires running under the skin up to your head. So that definitely seems, if that's what it looks like in production, it's pretty cool. And
So
pretty minimally, because patients do get annoyed at the like big bump under their skin and stuff. Like they understandably don't
yeah,
like
this is
that.
that little device. That thing at the bottom is just to hold the threads in place because they're just like little fine wires. Um, I mean,
I've got to
frankly,
admit that's
to
quite
sort of
cool.
simplify this,
Let's see
what we're,
what
I mean,
results they've gotten so
it's more
far though.
complicated than this, but it's in a lot of ways it's kind of like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. So, um, and it's yeah. So our current prototype version 0.9 has about 1,000 channels. So that's about 100 times better than the next
Okay,
best
that is a
uh,
minuscule battery life,
consumer device that's
but
available. And it's a 23 millimeters by 8 millimeters. It actually
see how it recharges.
fits
Well,
quite nicely in your skull. You could just
so it's got a recharge via induction coil. Presumably that looks like an induction coil. Um, and I was kind of expecting this would be one of the sacrifices they make. But if you can, so one of the problems with current rechargeable ones is that patients kind of hate having you've got like this thing under your skin, and this one's not a rechargeable one, but they look basically the same. Um, you have this under your skin with an induction coil for recharging inside it, and then for recharging you've got to put on this like harness thing and like have it over the top, which patients kind of hate. But if you can just integrate that into like a hat, that's probably not going to be a problem. And yeah, as you say, just stick the hat on while you're sleeping. Even better if you can just have, if it can do like power transmission over, a foot or so, um, that would
skull
be
is
that
about
would be
10
ideal.
millimeters thick. So
Let's see.
it fits. It goes flush with your skull. It's invisible, and all you can see afterwards is that there's a tiny scar. And if it's under your hair, you can't see it at all. In fact, I could have a Neuralink right now, and you wouldn't know. Maybe I do. So, and it's also got all the things that you would expect to see, the sensors you'd expect to see in a smartwatch or a phone, like notional measurement, temperature, pressure. So there's actually a lot of
These are
functions
really
that
useful
this device can
potentially.
do related to monitoring your health
It's
and warning
definitely
you about
smart to put
possible
that
heart
in.
attack or stroke or other damage, as well as sort of convenience features like playing music.
Well,
You do a lot.
also,
Um,
what he's not mentioning there is there's a bunch of diagnostic stuff you can do with like accelerometers. That if you're treating someone with Parkinson's, being able to like measure the amount of activity, the amount of time they're standing up, register falls, things like that. So it's potentially pretty cool.
it's sort of like if your phone went at your brain or something. Um, yeah, maybe that's not a great analogy. Um, anyway, so it's also inductively charged. So
Yeah.
it's charged in the same way that you charge a smartwatch or a phone. And so you can use it all day, charge it at night, and have full functionality. So you would really, um,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be completely seamless, and yeah,
Yeah.
no wires.
Absolutely true, Neon.
In terms of getting a link, so that, you need to have the device, a great device, and you also need to have a great robot that puts in the electrodes and does the surgery. So you want the surgery to be as automated and as possible, and the only way you can achieve the level of precision that's needed is with an advanced robot. Um,
So, like, just for reference, for deep brain stimulation currently, you can kind of do all of this. Like, DBS operations, you can last a bit more than an hour, but usually, but you can compress it. Um, and you totally could leave the hospital the same day, although I would expect in both the case of Neuralink and modern DBS, you wouldn't be leaving it the same day because you'll want to keep the patient in a couple of days for observation and particularly for like setting up the stimulator. Though some people will like go away and come back for an appointment in a week or whatever. So if this is accurate, it's cool, but not an amazing development.
so we're really looking for great people who can help develop both the device and the robot. And we feel confident about getting the link procedure, the installation of a link, done in under an hour. So you can basically go in the morning and leave the hospital in the afternoon. And it can be done without general anesthesia.
I mean, you can do
So in
anything
terms of
without
getting the
general
link,
anesthesia if you
like I
try
said,
hard enough.
essentially you open a piece of skull, you remove about a coin-sized piece of skull, and then the robot inserts the electrodes. We'll talk more about that later. Then the device replaces the portion of skull that was removed, and we basically close that up with actually super glue, which is how a lot of wounds are closed, and then you can just walk around right afterwards. It's pretty cool.
That I mean that is pretty cool, but well, let's see the surgical robot 'cause that's where a lot of the
So this is our
uh,
surgical robot,
key questions are going to go in.
and we actually ultimately
Okay.
want this robot to do essentially the entire surgery. So in everything from incision, removing the skull, inserting the electrodes, placing the device, and then closing things up and having you ready to leave. So we want to have a fully automated system.
Sure, but what can it do now?
And to be clear, this robot does actually work. We've used it for all of the implantations.
In what species,
So
Elon?
this shows you at sort of close-up view, which I think is actually not too gruesome, of the electrodes being inserted in the brain.
Okay, it's kind of
And if you
sewing
look
them
closely,
in.
you'll see that it's a little counterintuitive that if the electrodes are inserted very carefully, that there's no bleeding. And so if you have very tiny electrodes, and if they're inserted very carefully, so that the robot actually images the brain and makes sure to avoid any veins or arteries, so that the electrodes can be inserted with no
Yeah,
noticeable
it does a
damage.
bit,
So it
doesn't
will
it?
have no noticeable neural damage in inserting the link. Yeah, like you sort of think like if you
There'll be
stab
some.
something with a wire, surely it
Not
would
very
bleed, but
much though.
actually
Like
at
that.
a really small scale, it does not.
That looks like it should be pretty minimally. The
So
the
does it?
main fibers that you want to avoid can actually take like quite a lot of separation and moving around. So that does actually look like it should be fine. Though I question how deep that can go. Um, I mean, it might just be that they're targeting the cortex, the relatively accessible areas, the cortex first, which would be understandable. But being able to insert electrodes very deep inside the brain is extremely useful for a bunch of different
It
things you
actually
want to
work.
treat.
And what I'm excited to show you, I call it like the Three Little Pigs demo. And if our animal handlers, we're bringing out the pigs. And what we're going to show you is a,
Bring out the pig.
well, I'll walk right over and show you.
Okay, okay. So, pig, pretty human-like in many
So what we have
ways. Their
in pen
brains
number
are
one
considerably
is
more simple, but
Joyce, and she does not have an implant. Obviously healthy and
not a
happy.
bad choice for
Um,
model animal.
we're trying to get
Restaurant's
Gertrude
gotten
out,
really weird.
and this is how you know it's a live demo. She's like, trying to eat something in the corner of her pen.
Pigs are pretty adorable. I haven't worked
Come
with
on,
them, but
Gertrude.
I've been
No.
on a few lab tours where
Snacks are this way.
okay,
Okay.
we've got the so that's here we've got
All right.
spike
We'll
rates of
wait. We'll
different
give Gertrude
neurons.
a
Each
second,
of these is probably one
and we'll
channel,
move on to Dorothy.
each line.
Sometimes the pigs are a little shy. So here's Dorothy, and in the case of Dorothy, Dorothy used to have an implant, and then we removed the implant. So this is a very important thing to demonstrate is reversibility.
True, true.
So if
This is something I was
you have a Neuralink
concerned
and
about
then you
earlier.
decide you don't want it, or you want to get an upgrade, and the Neuralink is removed, is it removed in such a way that you are still healthy and happy afterwards? And what Dorothy illustrates is that you can put in the Neuralink, remove it, and be healthy, happy, and indistinguishable from a normal pig. Oh, thanks, Dorothy.
We're going to need a lot more research on
Gertrude,
that.
are you serious?
But, the fact that it hasn't had a massive cerebrovascular accident or something is encouraging.
Um, well, should we bring them all out or something? Would that be better? How about everyone just comes into this pen? And we'll have a few, it'll be a little crowded, but whatever.
Never work with children or
Okay.
animals.
All right. Well, is Gertrude still back in the thing? Okay, we need to bring Gertrude out. Yeah.
I'm very
Beautiful live demo.
sympathetic to
This
this
is
because
real live demo.
they needed to get
All right.
for me to be vaguely impressed, which I know is the main thing they
Zoom in
wanted to do with this
Gertrude.
presentation. They needed to
She's clearly very
have some
interested in something at the back of her pen.
ambulating animals. Yeah, yeah, this is, you know, demonstrating it in pigs in a live demo is reasonably impressive.
Can you see her? Or?
But yeah, as you say, this
All
definitely
right.
isn't indicating that it'll be, perfectly safe in humans. Um, but
This might take a sec.
good early steps.
Um,
Like
well,
so
this
far, I'd
worked
say
earlier.
I'm reasonably impressed with this. Though I would have liked to hear a little bit more about the how the craniotomy is undertaken, craniectomy, I suppose, um, and uh, excuse me, about the actual like how far
All
ahead
right.
they are
Well,
with human clinical testing. But the hardware looks very cool, uh, and
what if we
also the
lift the
depth,
curtain
just how
and then
deep it
zoom
can
in?
go. So you got to be nice to the piggies. You can't like force
All
them
right.
around.
Here
You
we
know,
go.
treat them well.
Great. Okay.
Otherwise, they
Great.
don't make good subjects.
Okay. This is a high energy pig. All right. Gertrude, thanks for coming out. So the beeps you're hearing are real-time signals from the Neuralink in Gertrude's head. So this Neuralink connects to neurons that are in her snout. So whenever she snuffles around and touches something with her snout, that sends out neural spikes, which are detected here.
That's
And so on the
that's a
screen,
clever way of doing it. Yeah.
you can see each of the spikes
Yeah,
from
Gertrude,
the
jam in.
1024 electrodes. And
Yeah,
and
sick
then
beat, right?
if she
Fucking
if she
fire.
snuffles around, touches her snout on the ground, or you kind of feed her some food, pigs love food, then you can see the neurons will fire much more
So
than
we do.
when you're
You can
not
do
touching
similar
the snout.
things with rats with the
And
barrel
that's
cortex,
just
which
makes
controls
things
their
sticky.
whiskers. Um,
All right, cool.
it's
So
kind of
as
the
you can see,
equivalent of.
we
Just
have
pause a second. That's basically the equivalent of uh, like implanting it in the human visual cortex. Pigs' ability to sense with their snout is very well developed. So you generally want to, like, for demonstration purposes, stick it in whichever bit of the sensory cortex handles that animal's like primary sense. Sorry. And in the case of pigs, it's like both touch and smell from their snout. And yeah, so sensible way of doing the demo. It looks like, I mean, I'd be intrigued to see how long that's been in, because it looks like they're getting a very nice signal there based on, just that visualization. Like, obviously I'd need to see more to get a better handle on it, but um, how long those electrodes have been in place is going to be a big question, because if they implanted that earlier this week, then yeah, cool, but it doesn't really demonstrate anything notable. Like, you can do that using standard like lab tech. It's just they've refined it a little bit. If that's been in for months and they're still getting that kind of quality signal, that's a big deal, because it's the long-term function of these things that is really difficult to do.
Healthy
One
and
of the
happy
things
pig.
that's difficult to do.
Initially shy, but obviously high energy and you know, kind of loving life. And she's had the implant for 2 months. So this is a
Okay,
healthy and happy
okay.
pig with an implant that is 2 months old, and working well. Yeah.
I mean, show me in 6 months if it's still functioning, but 2 months,
All right.
pretty
Cool.
solid.
And then
Like, we
we actually
generally see
have
signals
another
starting to
another
degrade after
question
like a month or so.
is, so we said, well, what
It's the
if
fact
we
that it's still
do
coming in
two
strong.
Neuralink implants, and we've been able
Bilateral,
to
nice.
do dual Neuralink implants actually I think 3 pigs at this point, and we have a couple of them here.
Solid, solid.
And we've been able to show that you can actually have multiple Neuralinks implanted, and again, healthy and happy and indistinguishable from a normal pig. So it's possible to have multiple links in your head and have them all be sending out signals and be working well.
Okay, I have previously discounted the utility of a Ghost in the Shell style cyber brain, like a electronic shell around one's cortex. But I mean, if you can scale that up, if you can basically just do a big craniectomy, just remove most of the skull and replace it with sheets of Neuralink, that could work. Anyway, get back to it, but this is pretty
All
exciting.
right. Phew. All right, so we just showed you a demonstration of reading brain activity, and see, probably see that. As I was saying,
So each
each of those
line is a
dots
channel.
represents a neural spike,
Yeah,
and the blue chart at the bottom
and the
is showing an
summation.
accumulation of neural spikes
Yeah.
in that region. So, in terms of additional brain reading activity, when we have, say, one of our pigs on a treadmill, pig on a treadmill. Funny concept, really. And we take the readings from the neurons, and we try to predict the position of the joints. And so we have the predicted position of the joints, and then we measure the actual position of the joints. You can see that they're almost exactly aligned. So we're able, with a wireless neural implant, to actually predict the position of all of the limbs in the pig's body
Okay, so this answers
with
my
very high accuracy.
are they actually paying any attention to real electrophysiology question. Um, yeah, oh cool.
Now, in terms
Cool,
of
Keaton.
writing to the brain or stimulating neurons,
Yeah, like this is,
we also
this
need
actual work,
precise
it's
control
not
of the electric
super
field
novel,
in space
but
and time.
it's
We
good
need a
proof of
wide
concept
range
stuff.
of current for different brain regions. Some regions require delicate stimulation, some require a lot of current, and you want obviously no harm
Sorry,
to the
not to
brain
see
over time.
say that your work wasn't novel, Keaton.
And the way we,
Obviously you were doing it before this,
part of the
so
way we analyze the
this is like
stimulated neurons
relatively recent stuff.
is with a 2-photon microscopy. I always have trouble pronouncing that, microscopy.
Microscopy.
And it's very impressive technology. You can actually literally see in real
It
time
is.
how the neurons are firing. So the red sort of things are the neurons. The red sort of flashing things are the neurons firing. Or I should say
That's a marker of.
the electrodes firing. So the red things are electrodes firing, and then the green are the neuron
Obviously those
bodies
have been added
responding
afterwards.
to
Yeah.
the current from the electrode. So you can see them lighting up different brain regions.
Yeah, cool.
And then by carefully controlling the electric field, you can
This is the
actually
kind of stuff that you
have
need to do to
one
demonstrate that
electrode
like any
influence
electrode will do
possibly
this.
1,000 or 10,000 neurons. So although you
Okay, so
might
that's
only
dealing
have
with the
1,000
the
electrodes
question we were talking
implanted,
about
you could
earlier.
be influencing
Um,
millions of neurons.
well, you want to bring that number down generally if you're doing precise stuff. But yeah,
It's just a
so
similar chart showing
affecting a
stimulation at
relatively
different
small population of neurons there, which is good
power
stuff.
levels. So, like I said, for the initial device, it's read-write in every channel with about 1,024 channels, all-day battery life, recharges overnight, has quite a long range. So you can have the range being to your phone, I should say. That's kind of an important thing. This would connect to your phone, and actually the application would be on your phone, and it would be communicating by essentially Bluetooth Low Energy to the device in your head.
Okay, that answers one of my
That's why I
questions.
say in a lot of ways it is like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. So
Yeah, and
like I said,
Fitbits aren't
you would
super
not be able
secure,
to
are they,
see
Elon?
the device at all. You would look completely normal and just have a small scar under your
And that's
hair.
the best way you can do it from like a practicality point of
And
view.
we're
But
making good progress towards clinical studies. I'm excited to announce that we received a breakthrough device designation from the FDA in July, thanks to the hard work of
yeah,
the Neuralink
exactly,
team.
Josh. Okay, so breakthrough designation. That's what I was talking about earlier. Yeah, I should, shouldn't I?
So I want to be
Yeah.
clear, we're working closely with the FDA, and we'll be extremely rigorous. In fact, we will significantly exceed the minimum FDA guidelines for safety. We will make this
And
as safe as
security.
possible. Just as with Tesla, while it is legally possible to ship a
Yeah,
one-star
normal
car,
robot. It's
at
the
Tesla,
it's exactly
the only
the
cars we make are 5 stars in every
Bluetooth.
category. So
Well, so
we actually maximize safety, and we'll take the
that's
same
FDA
approach
approval
here at Neuralink.
for its use as an experimental device. Just to
And to emphasize
clarify,
again,
Rostafarian, they
what the
haven't
goal of
gotten
this
like
presentation
widespread approval
is
yet by any
recruiting.
means.
We want people who are great at solving problems to join the company and help us complete this device, take care of the animals, write the software, create the chips, and productionize everything. So we need like robotics engineers. I think we also especially need people who have worked on worked on and shipped products. So if you've like shipped a smartwatch or a phone, or any kind of complex electronics or complex device, or advanced medical devices, we'd love for you to contact us and consider working here. So, and a very important point to emphasize is that you do not need to have prior experience on brains. So a lot of people think, well, I couldn't possibly work Neuralink because I don't know anything about how brains work. That's okay, you can learn, but we need software engineering, we need mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, like I said, chip design,
Probably need some
robotics,
actual neuroscientists in there too, Elon.
and
Like
all the things that a company needs to work.
multidisciplinary, sure, but
So
you definitely
please
need some
send in your resume. Actually,
people
it's not just
working on brains.
engineering. Obviously, everything at Neuralink. So now
Well, I might send
let's
in a
actually move
resume
to
if I
questions.
weren't
So
like
we'll have
quite
questions
disabled at
that
the
have
moment.
been asked over the internet, and
But yeah, that's
so we'll
pretty
do
impressive.
live Q&A.
Like
So
not
bring in
absolute
most
knockout
people
the
from the
park.
Neuralink
There's lots
team.
of questions left, but uh, that's less bullshit than I was expecting. Most of his claims were like pretty plausible. It's not complete crap. Uh, and yeah, like the actual demo, it hit. None of the things they were doing with it were uh, revolutionary, but
All
they're
right. So if you
demonstrating
have any
serious
questions,
neuroscience,
please submit your questions to the Neuralink Twitter account, and
and it
we'll
looks
try
like
to
the
answer as many
hardware is
questions as we can
genuinely
over the next hour.
quite a
And
breakthrough.
um, feel free to ask hard questions. That's no problem, and we'll do our best to answer them. All right. Let's move over to the team.
Perfect. Yes, we will continue monitoring questions until the end of the event, so please keep sending them in over Twitter. Elon, do you want to come join us? All right, so the first question is, how is the spike detection implemented? Is it on the ASIC? Is it hardware and software updatable?
Yes. Yeah, I can answer that. So I'm Paul. I work I've had a few different hats. I've worked a little bit on digital chip design, and more recently working on some of the algorithms, trying to decode the signals from the brain. And the spike detection algorithm, there's historically been many ways of detecting spikes. Typically, people will record data offline and then look for characteristic shapes. But here, we're interested in
Offline
detecting
is
spikes
like
online.
recording it, then
And there's a
analyzing it
number of
later.
simple
Online
algorithms
is
that you can do, for
analyzing
example, like
at the same
detecting
time.
just a threshold. And where we've been interested in doing a little bit better than that. So we actually look for particular shapes, characteristic shapes that we think are spikes. And so we're doing this on the chip. It's for all 1,024 electrodes. There's bandpass filtering that's happening on the chip. So if you think of these as like little microphones sending audio information, we're basically filtering all of that in real time and then looking for these characteristic shapes. You can configure what sort of shapes you're looking for, and that information is what's being sent out. The raw information coming from electrodes is way too much to send out over Bluetooth. So when you're seeing those beautiful spike rasters on the screen, those are the detections that we have coming straight from the chips.
Got it. And just for everyone who doesn't know, can you just explain at a basic level what a spike is?
Sure. So traditionally, people think of spikes or action potentials as the electrical events that happen in neurons, and is the primary form of communication between neurons. And so this is a hysteresis event where you have currents that flow and generate this. You can think of it as being a digital signal, a 1 or a 0 that's being sent in time, where neurons will send that signal to often thousands of recipient neurons.
Awesome, thanks, Paul. So I got a question from Toby
Yeah, broadly endorse
on
that.
Twitter. He asks, what can be further done to simplify the device installation progress?
Process, presumably.
So we're working on making the device as small as possible, of course, with the robot taking more and more of the responsibility away from error-prone human surgeons. We're hoping to make the process faster and safer.
Actually, it might be good for people to say, who they are and what they do.
Oh, I'm Matthew McDougall. I'm the head neurosurgeon at Neuralink.
Thanks, Matt. Is there anything specifically from the robot that can be done to make this faster and safer and scalable to billions of people?
Yeah, I guess we've started with just implementing, robot manipulating the threads. But we definitely need to expand to essentially doing the entire surgery with the robot. So there's nothing like really, as far as I can tell, fundamentally like stopping us from doing that, sort of like at a fundamental science level. It hasn't been done in the past, I think probably just because like volumes of surgeries hasn't been needed. But specifically for us to scale up to, many hundreds of thousands or millions of patients, we will need to automate like the entire surgery essentially.
Awesome.
Plausible,
Thank you,
yeah.
Ian. Garrett asks, what are some of the lower bandwidth activities to target first? Is it muscle movement? Is it auditory signals? What level of bandwidth is required for effective use?
I mean, not much. They've got a lot of bandwidth to work with there.
So there's a couple of...
Joey,
Just to say who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Joey O'Doherty. I'm a neuroscientist and neuroengineer working on decoding from the brain. So there's some low-hanging fruit that I think can really be impactful to help many people's lives, and that's restoring movement and communication in, for example, a spinal cord injured patient. And there's a lot of antecedents in the academic world where there have been very nice demonstrations of doing this. And we think we can take our technology and really bring that to the home, something people can take home with them and improve their lives.
Fantastic. Gil, there's a fun one next. All you.
Yeah, so we're fielding questions from Twitter, so there's going to be some funny comments. First question is, who are you and what do you do? I'll lead with that. And the question is, can the Neuralink chip allow you to summon your Tesla telepathically?
Definitely, of course.
You heard it here first. That's a definite 100%. Carlos, that is the answer.
Just one bit of information.
We'll be a little
Very
while
easy.
off that.
That's an easy one.
Actually, Max, this might be a question for
Actually,
you.
I was about to say we'll be a while off that, but that's blatantly going to be the
So one
first thing
question
they'll
we had on
implement,
Twitter
wasn't it?
how do you see the Neuralink device and the essentially API growing over time and allowing developers to interact with the device?
So there's interesting questions long term about whether you do decoding on head or on a phone or on a computer. Ultimately, so at 1,000 channels, it's possible to send all the spike data to a phone and do processing there. As this gets bigger and bigger, you're going to be more constrained by the radio, so you're going to want to push more of this on head, and that changes your programming model. But really, the APIs
On
you're getting
head.
either bin spikes, you're getting raw waveforms, and that's like you can consume it basically like an audio feed.
Yeah, it's worth noting, like the lossless compression of the data stream is about 100 kilobits with 1,024 channels.
Excellent. So this one came up a lot, and this particular question is from Yosef, but will this technology ever be used for gaming?
Yeah, probably.
100%.
100%, yeah.
I think that a good benchmark of does it work well in humans is, can a quadriplegic, does it work well enough for them to play StarCraft? I think that's a good functional target.
For sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll pull out.
Yeah,
pull
if you're
out
looking
back,
at like
from the Twitter questions
motor
that are kinda
function.
funny. This is a question for
Currently, like the
efficacy
state
of
of
the
the art
device.
in quadriplegics controlling computers is like being able to type a few words a minute. So yeah, being able to like play StarCraft competently seems like a good metric and is
Right
plausible.
now, is the device limited to surface layers of the brain only?
Good
Or can we
question.
go deeper? And if not now, what's holding us back from going deeper into the brain?
We are planning on modifying the device and the robot to be able to sew into arbitrary depths of the brain. Right now, we're limiting ourselves only to the cortical surface because that simplifies many of the problems involved with going a lot deeper.
Okay, fair enough, but
What kinds of things can you solve on the cortical surface versus when you go deeper?
Sure. So a lot of the low-level
sensory
processing happens in
epilepsy.
the cortex in terms of
I'll let the neurosurgeon answer.
motor intention, sensory information that comes directly in. So your hearing, your auditory percepts, your visual processing, a lot of that happens in the cortex.
I mean, you could solve blindness. You could solve paralysis. You can solve hearing. You can solve a lot with just by interfacing with the cortex. And to be clear, we actually do insert, I guess, about 3 or 4 millimeters into the cortex. So these electrodes are sensing from
Basically the
multiple layers
whole
in the cortex.
cortex isn't very thick.
There are deeper brain systems that are underneath
So
your cortex, like the hypothalamus.
cortex is folded, so some of it
and
isn't accessible within like
I
a
think
few
that is something
millimeters
we'd
of the
want to
surface.
interface with for sure.
Quite a lot of it, actually.
Because that's going to be important for curing things like I know, depression, addiction, that kind of thing, anxiety. But yeah, like I said in the presentation, overall we're aiming for a general purpose device, and really the thing that would change from interfacing with the cortex versus deep brain systems is kind of the length of the electrode. So we just need kind of longer wires and to adjust the robot in order to access deeper regions of the brain.
Awesome. Ian, did
Okay,
you have any?
so not
the
yet,
robot
but
is
sounds like
designed,
it's
the full length
feasible.
is like 7 centimeters or 8 centimeters.
Yeah, so right now we're designed for like 6 millimeters. The actuator itself isn't actually limited to 6 millimeters. You can go much deeper. That's sort of
Yeah, Elon
in
particularly
addition to
is
scaling out
talking.
sort of to the rest of the
He's
surgery,
using kind of
also scaling into
cure
deeper, which
and
is mostly a sensing
deal
problem,
with and
so the
treat
ability to
very
avoid deep vasculature
interchangeably here,
is
where
sort of an interesting problem that we're working on in the
whereas like
robotics world
and
here.
fix,
So yeah,
which
lots of cool problems in the robot.
very much
You're
the
the
engineer
robots
mindset,
engineer.
but
Yeah,
it's
sorry, I'm Ian.
not ideal
I
when
lead
there
the
is
robotics program here.
a lot of distinction between
Robotism and
treating
such.
and
All
curing.
right, next question is, what is the most challenging problem that must be solved in order to meet Neuralink's ultimate goal?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think one of the hardest problems is kind of, I'd say, material science and especially the installation of the electrodes. What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Felix Deku. I currently lead the microfabrication team. My team makes up of a group of process engineers and material scientists. And our job is to make the tiny wires, as Elon referred to them, what we call the threads that are implanted in the brain. And of course, the threads are made of conductors and insulators. and choosing the right material that is amenable to the brain and compatible to the brain is something that our team have expertise on, and we work seriously on interface engineering just to make sure that our layers are actually well thought through, well designed, and at the end of the day, when we implant this device, they'll be actually functional for either reading or for writing in the brain.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be important
Yeah,
from in terms of
I think that's something worth underlying and underlining, Neon Golden, is that this platform, if it works out, assuming it's as great as they claiming, this platform will provide the means with which we can start trying to treat certain disorders. And some applications it'll probably be super useful for, straight out the gate, like epilepsy monitoring in certain regions, so people with epilepsy affecting the more superficial regions of their cortex. Like this would be super useful day one, as soon as it's available. But when we're talking about the difference between creative device, plenty of potential, yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to treating something like depression or even like relatively straightforward like blindness, um, that's going to require a hell of a lot of not just engineering, but a greater understanding of the neural architecture before we can start seriously treating those. Now, it's possible that this will provide a greater means for scientists to investigate these things and speed up the development of those kind of treatments, which would be great. But yeah, this is something I have been quite concerned about throughout the overall like press for this, is that Musk seems to be quite cavalier with his description of like what they can do with it, and that's a particular problem in medical, in the healthcare industry, because we're talking about conditions, some of which cause a very, very large amount of suffering to people who are around now, and you don't want to give them false hope that a little like 10-minute operation is just around the corner to absolutely cure all of these terrible diseases, when even though the technology is a bit further along than I would have guessed and is it's pretty impressive, the know-how to actually treat that is a while off. It's like inventing keyhole surgery and saying we can now treat all organ problems. Like, it's a great technique, don't get me wrong, and it's something that will over time vastly increase our ability to deal with these problems. But yeah, he's kind of presenting this as a cure for X when it might be a platform that people in the future can use to treat X. Um, any window shattering moments? I wouldn't say any window shattering moments, but the kind of the threading of the individual electrode wires into the cortex was pretty impressive. That looks like a very cool process, and the hardware itself, I did have a little like wow sort of moment. So I wouldn't say window shattering, but definitely window rattling. This is a pretty impressive presentation. There's still that more than a whiff of Elon Musk bullshit in there, and there's a lot that's not been explained and a lot that we're going to need to see in the future. But I have to give him credit on this one, and I have to give the whole team here credit on this one, that they are clearly achieving something impressive here. And yeah, though no mention of
with real science
security,
problems
so
is making sure that
that's
the
something I
threads on
definitely
the
want to see them
electrodes can last
deal
for
with in the future.
decades in the brain, which is a tricky thing because it's a very corrosive environment, and you're in a dichotomy where you want to read and you want to sense electrical signals and you want to generate electrical signals, um, and but you don't want to corrode the electrodes over time. So you need to have an insulating layer that is
Yeah, it
very
is a difficult
robust,
one,
but also
J-Tips.
very,
Like,
very thin. Um,
I get
you
so
can't.
I have less of a problem with his kind of selling the dream when it comes to things like space travel. Um, and and it's a difficult one because I understand that urge to go, we're going to have all this fucking cool neurotechnology, we're going to be able to like stimulate our brains, we're going to be able to record from wherever we want, we can like treat depression, treat memory problems, and hook up the internet to our brains so we can see a constant visual feed of whatever we want, all this kind of stuff. And this is all stuff that's plausible in the next century or so. um, but uh, it's when we're dealing with very real conditions that affect large numbers of people, I think one has to adopt a somewhat more reserved tone in a way that Musk hasn't. Um, like I say, I'm not saying he's a massive shit or anything. I think this is a mistake on his part rather than like a fundamental glaring error that's going to ruin the whole thing. Um, but personally, when talking about the exciting stuff, I think it is important to try to temper the cool future uh, uh, wonder with a bit of humility and respect for the people who are very much dealing with all of these conditions. So
It has to be just the right amount of insulation, and it has to stay that amount of insulation over time.
I mean, yeah, all this
So
stuff
that's
about
why I
the
think we think
thread
probably like the
engineering is
silicon
totally
carbide
spot on. It's
type
really fucking hard.
insulator is probably the best long term from a material science standpoint. But
Interesting.
silicon carbide is a tough material to work with, but it's some that's probably the right choice long term. Would you say?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And it's also, apart from its electrical properties, it also helps with adhesion between the metal layers and the polymer substrate. Another thing that we're also looking at is, since we're actually reducing the electric dimensions, the electro side, the actual side that actually speaks to the neuron, also have what we call high resistance to the signal. So we actually look into like material engineering that will reduce the impedance at that interface, so that we can actually have a very small electrocyte but still be able to speak clearly to the neuron.
And when you guys
Yep.
say thin,
Driving
how
down impedance is always a challenge.
How
That's one of the
thin?
main things you're
So one strand of
recording
your
when
hair is about
implanting
100
the
microns in diameter.
system.
We can think about dividing that into 20. So one of the thickness that we're working on is about 5 microns, and we have this possibility to go even thinner.
Human hair is like
In the near
20
future.
microns
Yeah, we think we
diameter.
could probably go sub-micron in thickness, but obviously as the thinner you make the wire, the harder it is to sense the signal and to do stimulation, because there's less cross-sectional area for the current to traverse. Um, and yeah, in terms of upgrades, that's part of why I wanted to show the explanted plig, is to show that you can actually take the device out, and there's no observable behavior change. The pig is as happy as before, and healthy, and I think this is going to be important
This,
for
so I think
upgrades,
this,
because obviously if you get
if you missed it earlier, he showed three pigs, one of which had no device, one of which had the implanted device, and one of which had the device explanted previously. Now, important demo is something that you need to demonstrate that it can be safely removed. Um, but a pig who's still eating and snuffling, like that doesn't show it has no behavioral deficits. We're definitely going to want to see more animal work with longer term studies of any damage, of like histological studies. Um, but again, it's it's a really difficult. I feel it's important so that smart people end up attracted towards these types of problems instead of tiny academia problems. Yeah, I think selling it to smart people is important. Um, but I think there's a way that it's possible to do this. Um, uh, yeah, well, what Neon Golden says, I agree there. Um, I think there's ways to market this that um, still allow you to kind of talk about the potential, shining hills that we can ascend to with this technology, but don't give as much immediate hope. Specifically talking about like fixing blindness and curing memory loss. That is especially coming from someone who has a reputation for being a big problem solver and so forth, it's I think not ideal. Um, but that said, they should get Keanu Reeves to reprise his Neo role. Huh? Oh, isn't there
early
going to be a new
device,
Matrix? I think there
then
might be.
by the
Can't
time,
remember.
let's say you get version 1, probably by the time we have version 3 or 4, you want to upgrade. You wouldn't want version 1 of a phone and 10 years later everyone's got version 3 or 4. So it's going to be important to be able to remove the device and upgrade it over time. So over time,
Yeah, yeah.
the Neuralink would do even more than it did before.
This is something I uh whoa. Yeah, why they should have gotten gotten Keanu Reeves for this presentation. It did really well with the Cyberpunk 2077 presentation. Having him wheeling him in with a output of oh my mic volume or my the volume of the video, because my mic volume is on maximum currently. Uh, oh right, I'll turn that up a little bit. Um, but yeah, uh, I just have to wonder whether it would be easier to insert the electrode array and have the electronics removable. I wonder if that'll be feasible, because